My name is Hamza Azhar Salam, and you're watching the Pakistan Daily. Today, we're going to speak to political commentator and human rights activist Ms. Reham Khan about the latest updates in Afghanistan. So, Ms. Khan, UK Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab was criticized earlier for not being in touch with his Afghan and Pakistani counterparts during the events leading up to the fall of Kabul. Now, Mr. Raab is going to visit Pakistan for 2 days, where he is expected to meet senior civilian and military leaders. So, how do you view this visit and the timing of this visit?
Thank you, Hamza, and Assalamu alaikum. I think that Dominic Raab is not really one of the key figures in UK politics who can be credited for being in the right place at the right time. So I think this is particularly not surprising for me. As far as foreign policy is concerned, I think that the United Kingdom has had a rather weak relationship in terms of diplomacy with Pakistan. If you look at the red list issue, where Pakistan remains in the red list, there might be reasons of perhaps data collection and data sharing between Pakistan and the UK. But I do feel that there is a sense in Pakistani analysts that there seems to be a United Kingdom tilt towards India and seems to be a rather cold relationship with Pakistan in recent years. Now, who is to blame for that is anyone's guess. But I think that diplomacy hasn't been that much of a forte when it comes to the Pakistani counterparts either. I think that particularly Dominic Raab making the trip now is too little too late, or maybe that's why it's being done. I think that I fear that Pakistan has been penalized and even demonized in Western lobbies for a very long time for its role in Afghanistan. And the relationship with the West has been one of, we've been doing their bidding. So in Pakistan, we get a lot of criticism, politicos as well as the military has received a lot of criticism from people back home in Pakistan that we are always doing what the West asks us to do. And it seems that respect that is due to Pakistan has always been missing. And so I find that this visit now is suspicious. I view it quite suspiciously because I feel that Pakistan will once again be blamed for its role or lack of role or the fact that there is limited or too much influence over the Taliban in Afghanistan. So I feel that this is it's going to be an uphill battle for Pakistan once again in the West, because we are being seen and promoted as a country that is jubilant at the prospect of a Taliban government. We are viewed as friends of China. So this propaganda has been slowly gathering speed, and I fear that this is just going to be taken to another level.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, interesting. But Ms. Khan, Pakistan has also evacuated over 10,000 people from various countries in over 330 flights from Afghanistan. So how do you see Pakistan's greater role in Afghanistan overall? And do you think Pakistan can act as a bridge between the Taliban-led government and the world at large, including Western powers?
I think, again, this purely from the point of optics for the Pakistani government wasn't such a great idea, because back home in Pakistan and in the political lobbies, sort of their opponents have not taken kindly to this rather generous offer by Pakistan, and it's viewed with a lot of suspicion again. So not great optics. Once again, I feel that Pakistan has always been criticized for doing very little, and we've been accused of we've had demands like do more. But I find that there has been no reason to do the bidding, as we seem to never really get any rewards for it, and we certainly don't get any good press for it. Once again, I mean, we have taken the risk, been very hospitable, have made sure that the security of the American and the NATO guests in Islamabad and the Afghan families who are in transit has been ensured, but it doesn't look very well from the Pakistani point of view. for politics, and it certainly isn't going to earn us any brownie points in the West. I think once again this will be seen as something that's understood, that it's taken for granted, and I just think that we do quite a lot as it is, but we don't really get anything back for it. And a little bit of respect would be nice for a change.
Yes, yes, you're absolutely right. And Ms. Khan, another problem the West has with the Taliban regime is the rights of women. So, as a Pashtun woman, how do you think Taliban 2.0 will treat women in Afghanistan now? We've seen senior Taliban leaders say that women may not have senior leadership positions in the new government. So, how do you see the role of women in Afghanistan now?
I saw the spokesperson's interview, and I would credit him for being at least honest. And if you think about the role of women, or the women lack of women participation in politics, and certainly in higher positions in the cabinet, can we honestly say that that is the case in even for Pakistan? And if I bring you back to Ashraf Ghani's first cabinet, and there was a protest in Afghanistan, in Kabul, by female activists because they saw it as a bit of a sham. They were promised equal participation. They were promised positions in the cabinet, but towards the end of it, we saw only 3 names, and even those 3 names couldn't pass the test because there were certain issues with the 3 candidates. The candidates were unknown, so a lot of again at the time the criticism was that these 3 names of the women candidates were chosen with the intention that they would fail. So I think blaming the Taliban for not women participation, or not having, they've said it very, very frankly that there would be women participation, and that there is quite a lot of women, there's a lot of women officers in the bureaucracy and in other parts of the government, and that will continue, and that they want that to continue. But very honest and upfront about the fact that I don't believe that the top key positions might go to women. And I think that must be appreciated as at least honesty. Also, do not forget that this is not this is going to be the government that is being offered for the first few weeks or months of Afghanistan. It's just very quickly thought out, and I don't think that this is going to be the final government that we will see in Afghanistan. So I think it's going to be a Taliban heavy sort of an interim arrangement. What is interesting, or what will be interesting to see, is how the government is announced. So they said that they would announce in 3 days. So it's not what they announce, but the manner in which they announce is going to be key. So if we see women participation continuing, I would again say that the Taliban 2.0 is a little bit more convincing and believable, purely because I think in terms of diplomacy and political language, the way they've handled interviews, even the political wit is very, very westernized. And I think that perhaps even our Pakistani foreign minister could learn a thing or two from these younger spokespersons, because I think they're very conscious of the fact how they're viewed. They understand the propaganda that has been built up around them. And I recall interviews with Mullah Zaif, a former diplomat, of course, from the earlier Taliban regime. And even as far back as 2013 and before the 2014 elections in Afghanistan, they were quite open to the idea of women participation or women rights, and particularly strongly endorsing women's education and education for all. So I do think that the proof is in the pudding. Of course, we will see how believable these things are. But I also think that the model of democracy, or the model of women rights, or the model of expectations that we would have in Ireland or in Europe are perhaps unfair and unreasonable to be applied in Afghanistan overnight. It is going to be an evolutionary process. I think the Taliban that we saw in the early 90s into 2001, this is still a huge leap forward. So I think let's wait and see. I'd be a bit cautious to comment. I hope that they mean what they say, and they realize with the statements that have come out so far, they realize that the women population must be represented, and they must be included in that all-inclusive final Afghan government that they want to formulate, because there is no other way of going forward. And I think I've seen enough interviews in the past 10 years of various Taliban spokespersons and their higher leadership, which seems to suggest that they're ready for a change in Afghanistan under the Taliban.
Yes, yes, you're right, and it still remains to be seen. But Ms. Khan, we've also seen the dynamic between the US and the Taliban change drastically. As CNN revealed that the Taliban escorted the last remaining Americans to Kabul's Hamid Karzai International Airport before the US withdrawal. We're also witnessing cooperation between the US and the Taliban against the Islamic State, particularly the Khorasan offshoot of the terror group. So, how do you see the relationship between the US and the Taliban evolving post August 15th?
I'll take you back to your earlier question, which I forgot to address about whether Pakistan can be a bridge between the Taliban and the West. And I frankly think that the role of Pakistan should only be one of supportive, understanding, and perhaps advice on economic prosperity and facilitations of an economic nature. I think other than that, the Afghan Taliban now seem fairly competent in terms of diplomacy. And if you view their relationships with everyone, I mean, one of the first statements that came out was that we are hoping to have civil, friendly, positive relationships with China, Iran, and Pakistan, but do not consider us as part of any bloc. And we've seen even if you go back to the Doha talks, the talks were the main two stakeholders were the US and the Taliban. So of course they have been getting along fairly well to thrash out a Doha deal, and as a result, I think the Americans can be credited with giving the Taliban the edge in Afghanistan over the political government. So if anyone gave them that upper hand, it is following the Doha talks, because that was essentially between the Taliban and the Americans. It's no surprise to me that the Taliban would wish to cooperate in facilitating the departure of the Americans, because they don't want any blueprint of the Americans on Afghan soil in any shape or form. It is, of course, a huge triumph for them. It's looking really good for the Taliban at the moment, and whichever way you look at it. So why would they not facilitate? As far as ISIS and Daesh is concerned, I'm very concerned about that. I find it quite disturbing, actually, the presence of ISIS, the fact that we've had reports in Pakistan, we've been told through private briefings and even in the print sources, we've been told very clearly how over 3,000 ISIS troops have landed in Afghanistan. How they've arrived there is anyone's guess. But this is concerning, because I think part of the challenge the Taliban will face are those forces that are not entirely under their control. The ISIS was very fragmented in Afghanistan, and suddenly why and how they have become so organized, from attacks in the Balochistan province in Pakistan, as you might recall the attack on the Hazaras, the coal mine, only recently, and now this double twin attack on Kabul airport. So this is going to be the main challenge. I fear that Afghanistan is going to face challenges of certain lobbies like the ISIS, like ETIM, and these warring factions might be quite difficult for the Taliban to control and to sort of bring about peace. So that is the main concern. I think that the Taliban will require support on these issues, and perhaps even understanding, because I find that they are looking for stability, and they're looking for their upper hand. Certainly groups like the Daesh, or groups like even the Tehreek Taliban Pakistan, I think they've categorically, the Taliban in Afghanistan have said that is not our problem. They don't want to be held responsible for any of the groups. And I would tend to agree with them that they have limited control or leverage over these groups.
But do you think groups like the Islamic State can serve the purpose of uniting the Taliban and the United States against a common enemy?
I hope that if there's any unification plans by the Taliban, that they're not with the Americans. We must also be very cognizant of the fact why the US has been there for over 23 years. If you look at the history, it was actually long before 9/11 where the demands for handing over Osama bin Laden had been delivered or conveyed to the Taliban back in 2001. And then once 9/11 happened, it didn't take longer than a few weeks for the Americans to invade Afghanistan, and it was a matter of months. By December 2001, we had the new Karzai government, the interim setup. Why then they decided to stay for another 23 years makes no sense. What a lot of money has gone to waste, a lot of course, casualties for the US troops as well, and of course for Afghanistan. Even if we take on the argument that they could not find, capture, or assassinate Osama bin Laden in the first few years when he was hiding in Tora Bora, whether they didn't have that information, by 2011, they did get their man. Why did they then intend to or plan to stay another 10 years? If there was, what were they doing? Were they bringing stability to Afghanistan? Were they bringing democracy? Were they training the armed forces in Afghanistan? I mean, the training of the Afghan armed forces is for everyone to see. We've seen also that the development structure or the infrastructure that we would have wished for in Afghanistan hasn't really taken any sort of shape. So it's curious why the Americans would want to be there, other than, as Mark Twain says, that they just want to learn geography through war. But I find that if anyone is going to cooperate and collaborate about bringing peace in Afghanistan, it has to be the Afghans themselves. And they should be very, very careful of aligning themselves or collaborating themselves with anyone, particularly the US, but even other countries and other lobbies that might wish to fill the vacuum that the US has left behind, because obviously it's open. There's a vacuum at the moment, and everyone would want a share, a slice of the pie in Afghanistan. So I think the Taliban have, as I said, an uphill battle ahead.
Yes, yeah, this was going to be my next question, that since the US has now left Afghanistan, there's a huge security vacuum. So don't you think forces like China and Russia will exploit this vacuum and fulfill the place the US left?
But I think that when you say that can Pakistan be the bridge between the Taliban and the West, I think that that's what I mean, that the Taliban have shown themselves in the early days, in just a couple of weeks, they've shown quite a lot of maturity in the way they're handling relationships. So I think that they come across as Taliban 2.0, who want to have a balanced relationship with both China and Russia, as well as the US, India, Iran, and Pakistan. So I think that if they continue with this process where they will have relationships on the basis of certain things that they want doing. For example, when Turkey volunteered for the control of Kabul airport while they were part of NATO, the Taliban were very quick to reject that. This is a few months before the takeover. But since the withdrawal, since the 31st of August, the first statement that's come out today by the spokesperson is very clearly that they already have made progress with Qatar as well as with Turkey about flight operations from Kabul airports. So I think as long as the Taliban have everything in a way where they have a balanced relationship on the basis of certain things that they want facilitated, for example, flight operations on a certain contractual basis with either Turkey, Qatar, or both, that would be manageable. With China, a lot of people might not be aware, but the Taliban have had a longer relationship of dialogue, as well as sort of even doing business. And so I think that they are looking very confident in the way they're managing relationships with the West, with China, Iran, and others. And I think that perhaps they don't need a bridge. They don't really need another country to be a bridge. As far as China is concerned or the West is concerned. I think they are perhaps doing a fairly decent job by themselves.
Very interesting. And Ms. Khan, you've referred to the new Taliban regime as Taliban 2.0. So we know that Mullah Umar is dead. There are new senior leaders, new commanders, even new fighters, a new generation of fighters who've been fighting for the Taliban now. So do you think there's a fundamental difference between the Taliban, which was in government in the late 90s till 2001, and this government with these faces?
I think there are two elements that one must acknowledge. First of all, you've seen the spokespersons, you've seen their age, they're very young. They are all obviously quite clearly educated overseas. They don't seem to have been educated in Kabul. With their accents, it's quite clear that they have traveled and that they've lived in other cultures. The way they interact with women also is not, it's quite clear by the body language that they're very comfortable, that they the use of, as I said, political wit, the fact that they understand political sarcasm, and some of the statements that have come out have been very, very sharp, very witty, very they're very clued up. So I think that's a very good sign of the way that it's quite obvious by their demeanor, by the language that they use. I'll give you an example. On Indian TV the other day, there was Sohail Shaheen was being quizzed about why Afghans are fleeing Kabul. And I loved the fact that he came back with a really witty quip. And he said, well, I think I challenge you, you put an aircraft in Delhi and I'll see thousands of people wanting to flee Delhi as well. And so I think that this kind of new demeanor, new kind of presence of mind, the fact that they know what the propaganda will be against them and that they're prepared for that, I think is a very good sign that they have changed, they have evolved. Also, I think that this can't be that Taliban. They haven't really been fighting. Even the takeover of Taliban of Kabul, for example, was it was a quiet takeover. There was no shots fired. There have been no reports of violence. There have been no reports of any sort of hijackings or kidnappings or any kind of abuse. And they've been very clear for a number of years, even pre-Doha talks, in international interviews, where they've said that peace is the way forward and dialogue is the way forward. So I think that because they've not been fighting for a very long time and they have had no reason to fight. In fact, if I take you back to 9/11, when the question of Osama bin Laden being handed over to the US was being discussed, I think there was no resistance as such. There were a number of offers by the Taliban at the time that, maybe we should just go to an international court of justice, like The Hague, for example. Maybe we should sort of have a court set up in an Islamic country with 3 different Islamic countries, sort of, looking at the evidence and convicting Osama bin Laden. So they were making very reasonable diplomatic suggestions, all of which were turned down, rejected. And America chose the way of, invasion and the way of, I suppose, war. I think that the Taliban have naturally evolved as well, because they haven't been fighting for a very long time. There's no reason to fight anyway. I think their main challenge is going to be rebuilding, reconstruction of Afghanistan, and the fact that there has been a brain drain. And you see, when they say that the 31st of August is the end of war, I have a problem with that statement, because just because the last uniformed soldier, American soldier, has left Afghanistan does not spell the end of war. End of war means peace, and peace does not mean that there's no more conventional war. Peace means that there is confidence in the people who live there, that they have the absence of fear, development, the confidence to go out and work. And that, I think, is going to be the main challenge for Taliban, because not only a lot of people will be fleeing and will want to leave, because, of course, nobody wants to live in a conflict zone or a country that has been ravaged with war. And the statements that have come out of the Taliban leadership so far have been about economic prosperity. And that's why they've said positive things about the Chinese as well. And I think that as long as there are no spoilers in Afghanistan, and as long as economic prosperity is supported by everyone. I think that the US could play a role. China certainly will play a role, has played a role, and will continue to do so. And I think that the key change that I would like to see would be the attitude of India towards Afghanistan and the China-Pak economic corridor as well, because I think once that mindset changes in India, it could actually spell prosperity for the entire region. I think Iran, Pakistan, China, and Afghanistan are on board, and then Turkey will probably join in soon. But that resentment, that anti-China feeling that is being nurtured in India, that needs to be taken care of because it's in no one's interest. It's not in the interest of India. It's certainly not in the interest of the region, and certainly not good for Afghanistan.
Yes, yes, you're absolutely right. And Ms. Khan, I'd like to ask you the last question, and that's about the fighting in Panjshir Valley, where fighters led by Ahmed Shah Massoud's son, Ahmed Massoud, have been fighting the Taliban actively after talks between the Panjshir elders and the Taliban leaders failed. And we've also received reports and information about India supporting the rebellion in Panjshir. So, how do you view the situation there, and do you think there will be a violent outcome of this fight, or will they be able to resolve this matter?
This is what I mean by spoilers, and I think that there is going to be, of course, for a lot of the world, and perhaps thanks to Pakistani media as well, the sort of they've barely in Pakistan they've barely concealed the jubilation of the Taliban takeover. And from Indian media, it's quite clear that it's not something that they've taken kindly to. And we've done our best in Pakistan to rub salt on the wounds. And that might not be the best policy. And so for Afghanistan, you see, I have a personal emotional attachment because I have been a witness to the first Afghan war as I was brought up in Peshawar. I've seen the first lot of refugees. I have close friends who were Afghan refugees, over 30 years ago. I've seen their devastation and their displacement. I do not wish it for anyone in the world. And I feel that Afghanistan needs to be given some breathing space for the sake of the Afghan people, not for the Taliban, not for the Afghan government, but for the Afghan people, where everyone in the region needs to behave responsibly with maturity. And I think that for a very long time, Afghanistan has been the place where everyone wants their hold and their influence. And in that, we have done a lot of damage to this beautiful country and to beautiful people. And I think that this has to stop. So you're absolutely right. The statements coming out of Ahmed Shah Massoud's son are every 4 or 5 hours there are conflicting statements. They're contradictory statements. So one article will tell you that he's ready to fight, and then 5 hours later it'll be updated and say, well, we are in reconciliation. So there is going to be a lot of bargaining. I think that's, like I said, there's all the old players who have come out of the woodwork. You will see the selection process again, which seems to be part of Afghanistan's last 20 years. And I think that whatever cabinet or whatever government is going to be announced in the next 3 days, as the Taliban have said, is just going to be an interim setup. There will be a lot of give and take. There has to be a lot of give and take. This is what an all-inclusive government means. It's not something that I'm a huge fan of, but that is the predicament that Afghanistan and the Taliban face, because there's so much diversity, there's so many races, so many communities that need to be accommodated. I only hope that this power sharing arrangement is not as weak a power sharing arrangement of the 2014 between Ashraf Ghani and Abdullah. And I hope that this is going to be more representative of the people and not representative of the familiar players who keep re-emerging and are recycled. So I hope sense prevails. But yes, the Panjshir Valley issue will have to be resolved. And yes, there will be players who will want to finance a civil war in Afghanistan and will want instability in Afghanistan purely because China containment is the target, and sadly Afghanistan is part of the new great game. So I think that there needs to be I think that the Taliban are very aware of that, and which is why they're treading quite cautiously. If you've heard their statements, they've been very diplomatic when it comes to talking about India and also about the US. So they're trying their best to balance. Let's see how far they get with it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's hope for the best for Afghanistan, Ms. Khan, and thank you very much for speaking to the Pakistan Daily today.
Thank you. Pleasure as always, Hamza. Thank you.